when you feel alone, you don't fight for yourself. You've lost your courage. You don't want people to know what's going on in your home. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. You feel so broken and you feel like it's your fault. So I want this charity not only to be a monetary resource, but to be a source to lift women up and let them know that it is not on them because they were kind and they cared and they loved and they tried and continue to try. That does not make you a weak person. It doesn't make you crazy. It doesn't make you anything but a person who's highly empathetic and cares greatly for everyone. But at a certain point, you've got to care for yourself.
You, my friend, are a compassionate, caring, empathetic human being. Do you know that? When is the last time somebody said that to you? When is the last time somebody said thank you for everything you do? If it's been a while, let me be the first to say thank you. And also thank you for tuning in to Holistically Speaking week after week, because those are the kind of people that tune into this show. But being that type of person means that you likely put others first, don't you? Yeah, I know. I do it too. And when the you know what hits the fan, you still do what you know how to do best. You protect, you nurture, you love, you give to others. It's just part of your makeup. The human being kicks in before the human doing because you care about others. I get that. I do it too. But that got me thinking about those of us who are the caretakers, the CEOs of the home, mainly a job given to women by women, usually ourselves. How are you going to handle all of that when something goes wrong? When life throws you a curveball, a death, a health concern, an unsafe environment, trauma? It's no longer about thriving, is it? It's about surviving. And as women, we have a very hard time asking for help. And that really got me thinking. And before I knew it, there was a quote that fell across my space. And it was like, the universe just puts in your hands what you need in that moment. And the quote read like this: the reality is that anyone can find themselves in a position where they stand to lose everything in an instant. It is our duty as a community to help one another as we hope others will help us. Let that sink in. Julie Barth said that. If you don't know who she is, you are about to get to know her a little bit, because this episode is a little different. I've joined a movement. This year, I'm taking part in something that's called Podcast-thon. It's a global charity podcast event happening this March. And podcasters across the world are taking part in this, where we're dedicating one episode to a nonprofit or a charity, a philanthropic organization of choice, to bring awareness, to really help each other out, right? Help others help us. So that's what we're doing here. And I'm dedicating this episode of Holistically Speaking to support the Colin James Barth Outreach, CJB Outreach, because they're dedicated to empowering women-led households in times of crisis. Because no matter who you are, no mother should have to choose between their child's safety or a lack of resources. So by providing legal assistance, they're helping to protect those families without fear, without intimidation or financial strain, ensuring that they can make decisions, they being women, they being mothers, from a place of strength and not desperation. Julie's own trauma became her triumph when she lost her first husband, Colin, to cancer, was caring for 6 children, including one with special needs, and then she found herself in a new relationship that was less than desirable. In fact, it was a nightmare for both her and her children. But somewhere along the way, after losing everything, she found herself again, and she said yes to help. CJB Outreach was born out of that. And maybe you or someone you know could use their support. And that's why we're dedicating this episode with partnership with Podcast-thon to CJB and all the women out there who know that it is okay to say yes to help. So take a listen. Julie, We had a couple moments to talk. This is a new relationship, you and me, and I'm just elated to know that people like you are on this planet. And it's while we say it's unfortunate that we go through these traumas in our lives, but we're able to turn them into triumphs, hopefully. You're truly the spirit behind that. And I'm so glad to have you here on the show to share your story, to share your mission, and welcome.
Well, well, thank you so much. Sometimes it's hard to hear those kind of phrases, but I really appreciate them.
Absolutely. Usually the compassionate, empathetic type tend to say that, especially us women. It's
Yeah,
hard for us to accept compliments, you know? But when those moments come and you can just sit back and see what you're doing and how you're making a difference, it's just coming from the most authentic place, isn't it?
it is. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you always hope that that's how people see you. So it is. It does make your heart shine a little bit. So thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. So, what I would like to do is just share with the holistically speaking audience who you are, more about what you're doing, your mission, your story. This is a really special episode. And, you have a relatively new nonprofit that really caught my eye. Your story caught my eye. And I'd rather the words come from you because the idea of putting this mess into a message to create something bigger as a collective, as a community, is really what we're all about on this planet. Hopefully, we follow that way of living. But your story really is making a difference. And I would love for you to just share.
Well, thank you. I am the mother to six. I have been through a lot of stuff. I mean, and everybody has. So I'm no different than anybody else. But I've seen my fair share of people I love, which is, I think, even harder. When you go through, well, it's debatable, but when you go through something yourself, you experience it. Experiencing secondhand, sometimes you can just, there's so many things that are out of your control. My story started. I'm an author. The first book that I wrote started because I was mother to four. I had a daughter with special needs who had been through a whole bunch of traumas, and she was just coming out the other end. She has primordial dwarfism. Still, she's 24 now, and she's fighting 24 pounds, and you'd never know it because she's a spitfire. But the book, I found out that my husband, who was my pretty much my soulmate. I had met him first kiss, high school sweethearts, was diagnosed with stage four pancreatic cancer. When my youngest at the time of four was 6 months, they said, take him home. He's got 2 weeks to live. So, coming off of all the trauma with Tatum, she was starting to fly, and it was almost like this is the way that I see the world. Colin was there by my side. He was my person to hold me up, and he was there for a very short period of time, but he got Tatum to a place where she was starting to soar, and it was almost his time to kind of exit. And as much as I hated that, I couldn't imagine life without him
Mhm.
going through what we did with Tatum. So my first book is really a tribute to both Tatum's fight. If you hopefully will get a chance to read it, she is a miracle by every she wasn't supposed to be born, she wasn't supposed to talk, she wasn't supposed to walk, and here we are again 24 years later, and she's an artist, and she's a force. And to make matters worse, she which starts up the second book, she came down with cancer when she was 13, so she finally fought her way up and then ended up with a rare form of cancer after everything was resolved. But I've tried to take all of that and honor Colin's name, and that was my first husband's name. And I've just been in a lot of positions where I've had to rebuild, reinvent. Everything's fallen on me to care for, to make sure people are taken care of, and I take that responsibility very heavily. And there have been points in my life where you're down to your last dime,
Mm.
you're down to your last pit of energy, and you think, I can't do this anymore. But as any woman, mother knows, you can't. You- and there's no stopping. You're in a marathon and you just keep running.
And
Um,
and you mentioned, we're going to talk in a minute about the Colin James Barth Outreach, which is the nonprofit you created in to your first husband's name, who passed from pancreatic cancer. I can only imagine. And doing so many episodes as I've done, having so many conversations and talking to people who have really been through different struggles and traumas rather, you know, to find help when you're in that traumatic place is really difficult, no matter what the upset is. I mean, you're in fight or flight. How do I get help? Where do I go first? And so when I heard about your story that you're focusing on helping women led households, women who are needing and seeking support when they might have a spouse that is going through something or a child that's going through something, or good God, you're going through something because you're running the household. You're the CEO of the household. That's what women normally are. And where do you go for help during these times? Because a lot of things run through our minds of where do we go first and what help do we need that we don't even find out what help we need until we're in it and it feels like there is no help, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't ask for help. I have a very independent mother. We were taught stand tall, and I think that that is a huge part of our generation as
Mhm.
women. We're taught to be breadwinners, but mothers. So accepting help is a very hard thing because it's almost like a loss of control, and
Mhm.
nobody wants to lose that control over their household. So when people would ask, what can I help you with? That was almost more stressful than not having help, because even the thought of me sitting around and going, I can't even tell you what I need because I don't even know what I need,
Mhm.
because it would, shift so quickly that, I will say that, and this is part of the thought behind my charity too, is that you don't know what you need, and but other people do. Just because I was sitting there going, gosh, I don't, what do I need? Anyone could have walked in my house and said, she clearly needs to do her laundry, her refrigerator's empty, her kids haven't been picked up from school. But those were thoughts that I couldn't, they couldn't resonate. I was putting out fire alarms.
Mhm.
I was, one was Colin needing his medicine, his appointment. Um, so I did have many people, and I was very the last who stepped in and just said, I even had one woman, I woke up in the morning and they were snow plowing my driveway, and I didn't even know who they were. They just came over, and it's those little pieces of pockets of, you know, people stepping in and stepping up,
Yeah,
and they don't even have to know you, but the smallest things can make the biggest difference in your
absolutely.
life, whatever
Yeah.
position that is. And when you don't have to ask for it
Yeah.
or, beg for it or,
Yeah, and you mentioned community. You say community and people that are stepping in that you don't even know, and really that's what it's all about, right? And when you're in the throes of things, it's hard for you to put thought together of what you really do need, like I mentioned, and you're saying that as well. And I think it can be any kind of situation when we're in that, but when we are trying to make everything work, sometimes it's so hard to take ourselves out of the narrative to see what it is we need. And when you created this foundation, this charity, this wasn't when you were in the throes of it, by the way. I do want to make it very clear that this has been a 12-year journey to get you to the place where you now have the Colin James Barth mission, right? This organization, this
correct.
outreach, because of the things that you dealt with even after the loss of your husband and then raising for then what became 6 children, like you said, because you were then in a second relationship that did not fare very well or allow
Yeah.
you to move into that space. Can we talk about that briefly too?
You hear survivor's guilt, and this
Mhm,
is, something outside of that. To me, survivor's guilt was always kind of like, you know, you're in a lifeboat and you make a decision to get out at the sacrifice of somebody else. I always thought it was like, Twin Towers. You
mm,
made it up the stairs, someone else didn't. But I didn't recognize that it happens to people who care give in these situations. And, I came out of it not knowing all of the guilt that I had. Anybody on the outside would say, oh my gosh, you were so strong.
mhm,
You cared for him so deeply. But there are things that you say to yourself in your inside voice, wishing him gone,
mhm,
wishing that he wasn't around anymore, saying, he wanted to go for treatment. And I was lying to him because he didn't have the wherewithal to be able to even reason why we weren't. But I had to lie to him, and he
Mm.
was my best friend, and I had to lie to him continually. And it's all of those experiences, things that you were thinking that maybe nobody else heard, but you did. And when somebody leaves, you remember the person that you lost before they got sick, not the person that you so desperately wish would move that was sick. So all of those feelings, you just kind of pick them up, you shelf them, you move along. And if you don't unpack them, you end up in situations like I did with my second marriage. And I settled for somebody who treated me very badly. And I think, unpacking all of that, I had so much guilt and shame in my inside voice in not being able to save someone who looked to me to save them, that I thought I deserved what I got. I
Mm.
just thought, that I wasn't a good person. If people knew what I was thinking, if people knew that I lied to my husband, when he was in his final moments, I took that very personally, and I could not let go of that. And instead of having somebody there to talk to me, the shame was eating away at me, and drove me into further shame, because then I married somebody who took advantage of it, saw my weaknesses, used them against me. And then where do you go with it? Because I had left my entire past behind, thinking I was going to start over and leave Julie Barth behind. You can't. It has to be unpacked, but that unpacking is so painful, that it's much easier to just keep the train on the same pavement. So that's what I did.
At some point, Julie picked up her bootstraps, pulled him up, and said, enough is enough. And I'm curious about that point in your life. When did that happen where now you're in a relationship that is not loving, not caring, with someone that is taking advantage and abusing you? How did you walk away from that? Because as someone who deals with a lot of narcissistic, abusive relationships in the work that I do, and even going through it myself, by the way, it's very hard to see it when you're in it. In fact, it's
Yeah.
almost impossible. But it's not impossible to get out of it. I want to preface it with that because
No.
obviously both of us are an example of that. But it's hard to see it when you're in it, especially when you are beat down. And so, how did you move forward and remove yourself from that situation and build yourself back up?
I would love to say that I had had enough and I walked away. So I did have enough, but I had two very small
Yeah.
children, and I knew that they would be used as pawns, and they were not old enough to speak for themselves. So I kept at it. But I did have four children from my first marriage, who he was very terrible to. I specifically had a younger boy who was very sensitive and just wanted a dad, and was stepped all over and very ridiculed. And one day, I had a come to Jesus moment, and he said to me, "Mom, I don't understand why you keep going back. He's
Mm.
threatened to kill me. He's threatened to kill you. I've slept, and you know these things, but you don't want to acknowledge it." He said, "I've slept with a knife under my bed since I was 6. That was it. I don't care what it takes. I have put this off long enough. I've excused it. I have made excuses for it. I've isolated myself." And I thought that I was being the buffer, like I thought placing myself in the middle of it, taking the brunt of it, being yelled at and screamed at and threatened, and that I was protecting them. And kids know.
Yeah, they're smart.
Yeah, and the thought that I let him grow up without a childhood and a knife under his bed was enough. So it was not easy. I He came after me, he lied about me, he set me up for 2 years, he recorded me, he sent things to his friends, he sent all my text messages to other people, he stole everything I had, he
Mm.
bottomed out my accounts. He did everything possible, and I knew at a certain point that I was going to lose everything, and I had to be okay with that. And I just had to make sure that my children were protected. And I wasn't able to for 3 years. It was a battle and a fight. And I gave every dollar I had, and I said, I don't care if I live in a trailer park, and it should never come to that. My children, if I deserved it, that was one thing, but my children did not deserve to be put on hold, to have a guardian that wasn't listening. and for my hands to be tied
Yeah.
and put them in jeopardy. So that's when not only did I step up, but I said, I won't ever let anyone, as long as I can, if I can.
Yeah.
I never want anyone to be in that position again.
That takes a lot of courage and vulnerability, especially
Mhm.
when there's still that trauma from the first marriage and a loss. It's still, even if it was toxic in the second marriage, it's still a loss. And then there's the
Yeah.
fear of losing children and losing everything. But clearly, you're on the other side of this now, and you're able to
And
put this amazing organization to work, which I truly love this. And look, we're doing a very special episode here because I'm part of a movement that's happening right now called Podcastathon. It is a global community of podcasters who are featuring and focusing on charities and nonprofits so that we can amplify the voice, be the voice, and help put these amazing charities out there. And so that's why I wanted to focus on the Colin James Barth Outreach and your story and what you're doing, because seeing this happen and really truly being what holistically speaking is about, those trauma to triumph stories, you're the poster child for this because you've been through battle of loss, and you've been through the battle of sickness and being a parent of a special needs child and losing everything and abusive relationships, and here you are on the other side, and you go back 12 years later to creating this organization so that you can help others like you find the support that you had a hard time finding. Yeah. So
yes,
I love
yes.
that. And I'm
Thanks.
so grateful to have you share this story. And we didn't get a chance to really talk about your books yet. Real quick, the first book you said is about your daughter and Colin, your daughter Tatum, and who's the incredible artist. Is that the one that is with just
Yes.
6 children? How do you keep track of all their amazing talents, right? And
uh,
that one's notes from a Blackberry,
a
a
Blackberry.
Blackberry,
Mhm.
right? And then your
Yes.
second book is what?
That one's going to be released later this year,
Okay,
and it's called From Blackberries to Thorns.
great.
And then I actually am in the writing a third one right now that's From Thorns to Blossoms,
Wow.
and that's hopefully more of a introspect, like y- unpacking everything and trying to figure out, the meaning and helping others to, you know, take action instead of sticking with it and keep hoping it's going to get better when it clearly isn't worth saving.
Clearly, writing is therapeutic for you because you mentioned that, and we had this conversation, that you wrote a lot of the first book, Notes from a Blackberry, on your Blackberry, which, do we even have Blackberries anymore?
No.
But it just goes to show you how long ago you started working on this. When Colin was sick, you were doing this when he was going through treatment. And there's so much that can really come from just purging and writing. So it is a memoir. And then moving into the
It is.
second book that you have coming out, and then the third book, we're going to put all of that in the notes of this podcast so people can grab that book. And
Well, actually, it's coming out in audio too.
it's an
So
audio.
I'm very
Great.
excited about that. Yes, it'll be
Amazing.
out later this month. My best friend growing up, one of my childhood neighbors, we lost touch, and she called me and she said, I'm a voice actress. So we collaborated. Yeah, it's really cool to have somebody who knows the story narrating it. And yeah,
That's
it's
another
kind of like
area
a
of community.
universe.
That's another area of
It is.
community.
It's
So
the,
it's wonderful when you see people coming together. But let's talk about the charity too. And again, we're doing this episode in collaboration with Podcastathon. It's a global effort to inspire you to get in touch with a charity, to see what other charities are out there. So focusing on the Colin James Barth Outreach, and let's talk about that specifically so that we can give people an idea exactly what it is that this charity is doing and who it's helping.
So it was formed obviously to honor my first husband, but that situation itself was just kind of a microcosm of what I'm trying to accomplish. As women, we're caregivers. We're, caring for our parents, we're caring for our children, we're caring for our significant others, and sometimes we find ourselves in a position where we were single, and not only single but head of household for whatever reason, whether that's divorce or illness, and you've devoted your entire adult life to not being the breadwinner. You might have a job, or you might have or a second income even, and all of a sudden you're in the throes of not only having to care for children but take care of everyone. And you go in for a job and they say, well, what's your experience? And it's almost as if you've been living in a bubble for it. Well, I don't have any, but you do. I mean, your project manager, your therapist, your nurse, your caregiver, your counselor. You're probably doing sales at your kid's school. So there's a lot of kind of revolving pieces in this charity that we're running. We're trying to partner with companies who are willing to see women for, sure, their education is 10 years old, maybe 15 years old, but to recognize their special skills, what they bring to the table, that they have so many talents to give, and not in a, part-time capacity for minimum wage, and who are also willing to work with them to work around their schedules so that they can work at nighttime when they're most productive, when they have the right hours. And it's meaningful work. It's not remedial work. We have so much to give as mothers, and there's so many lessons to learn from us. But unfortunately, our society tends to make us feel as if we're an afterthought, or, oh, that's great, and kind of pat us on the head. So I'm trying to overcome those barriers to experience and work experience, because I don't know what's harder than to run a household. So that's one part of it. The second part is, if you find yourself in a situation as I did in a divorce with somebody who the average woman's standard of living goes down 40% when they get divorced, and a man's goes down 10% on average. So there's a lot of range in that too. Um, I don't think that women should have to get to a point where they are having to flee their homes. They need assistance to pay for their kids' clothing. And, why don't we have support systems that stop them before they get there and protects children when we can't through monetary means? The guardian ad litem system is broken, our court systems are broken, and I can't fix the courts, but I want to be the person that helps to give people resources to get out of the situations they're in. I'd love to, don't get me wrong, I'd love to get started on the courts, but one step at a time. It's just, I want to give women community, especially in these situations where you feel like your community has abandoned you, which they haven't. You
Mm.
feel like your family has walked away, and they haven't. They just don't know how to help.
Yeah. And we hear the word community a lot, community, collective. Look, I have one as well, and there are many others who tune into this show, even those that don't, that have built communities, collectives, tribes, or whatever you want to call it, that we can connect with. And more likely it's women, because we are sisters, we need support. It's how we started. That's how we created that collective in the red tent back in the day, right?
Yeah.
So what makes this more than just a community and a support? I mean, what kind of things are you really offering within the outreach program that can be very beneficial to women and women-led households and those who are going through something in the struggle where they don't see the forest through the trees?
Mostly like I said, what we want to do is take away the burden of bills when it comes to legal fees, so that you can focus on protecting your kids instead of, oh, I can't even send my lawyer another email because it's going to cost me $25, because you do get to that.
Mm,
I also want to build a network of lawyers and
mm,
guardian ad litems and counselors who know how to identify these sort of economic, financial, and emotional abuse situations that they are not recognized in the court. You cannot go to court and say, I've been emotionally abused, because it's not a thing, which again needs to be tackled on a different front. But we need people who can spot these things, who can say this is what's going on, and protect these kids from being used as pawns, because that's exactly what happens.
mm,
So that's a big part of the charity, as well as just mentoring. I personally, in talking about our charity, I can't even tell you, I have probably encountered 20 people in the past 2 weeks that I have sat down and had a conversation about this. And everyone is saying, my sister's going through this. My aunt went through this. My best friend is going through this. And they have all asked me, will you please, would you mind sitting down with them? Would you mind explaining to them, so that when you feel alone, you don't fight for yourself. You've lost your courage. You don't want people to know what's going on in your home. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. You feel so broken, and you feel like it's your fault. I want this charity not only to be a monetary resource, but to be a source to lift women up and let them know that it is not on them because they were kind and they cared and they loved and they tried and continue to try. That does not make you a weak person. It doesn't make you crazy. It doesn't make you anything but a person who's highly empathetic and cares greatly for everyone. But at a certain point, you've got to care for yourself.
And that's really the strength right there, is realizing when you need help and asking for help. That's the biggest batch of courage right there, is
It
saying, you know
is.
what, I can't do it all myself. And look, I hear this a lot, a lot. And I think the first step to any change has to be an awareness that a change needs to happen. So when you're in the throes of something, and maybe you don't see it when you're in it, because it is hard to see it when you are in it. But that moment where you have that little spark of, that says something just doesn't feel right. It's usually right. And it's usually that higher self, that GPS system that we have internally saying, I'm going against the resistance of something, and maybe I need to just take a step back. And yeah, be okay asking for help, because you'd be surprised, my friends, those tuning in, and Julie as well, myself, these are messages to myself as well. I'm talking to me too,
Yes,
that
I know.
you'd be surprised how many people will step forward and say, how can I support you, when you just ask for help,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, I can't tell you how many people sat there and listened to me for years, years. And finally, I had one friend say to me, when you are done, you will know you are done. And I
Mm,
remember thinking, oh, you don't understand. I'm going to go down with the ship with this one. But she was the very first person to come back and say, I knew you would know. And I didn't want to push you, but I was waiting in the wings. And there are
mm,
people that are always waiting in the wings. They might not, they don't want to get involved because they think you're going to probably go back to it, and then you're going to shut them out if they talk badly,
mhm.
so they're stuck in kind of the same fog that you are, just standing on the outside wondering how to help, but
Yeah.
they will and they want to.
Right. So I want to mention something. I saw this on your website. By the way, we're going to put all of this in the podcast notes. It's the CJB Outreach.org. That's for Colin James Barth. That is your first husband that you lost, your love of your life. Love that you are coming back. And I'm sure he is, wherever he is going, you go, girl. I knew you were going to do it. You ever think about stuff
Yeah.
like that? Like what he
I do.
thinks? Do
I
you?
do. Yeah. Oh, probably more so than I'd want to admit.
Yeah.
Yes. If there was one person that I really just cared what he thought, and not to go back to it either, but there were many times after he passed that I made decisions, and that was another thing, is I thought he would have made a better decision. He was always my guide. He was always, but in looking back on it, he was my guide because he stood behind me and
Mm,
he supported me. And all you need is to have the support of someone that you really believe in to help you believe in yourself. And
yeah.
that's what we want to be.
And hey, there's that quote out there, behind every good man is a strong woman. So
It's not a quote, it's a reality.
it is a
Yeah.
reality. But you said, and speaking of reality, you said, and this is on your website, it said the reality is anyone can find themselves in a position where they stand to lose everything in an instant, like in an instant. And if it is your duty, it is our duty as a community to help one another as we hope others will help us, right? And it can be as
Yes.
simple as just deciding and saying, "Hey, Julie, I want this to be the subject of this podcast episode," or "How can I support you further?" Or you need your laundry folded? Cool, I got you." Or "You need me to
Yes.
do a
I'm at the
voiceover?"
grocery store. Yeah. I'm at the grocery store. Let me pick something up for you.
Right. Oh, it's the simplest things that make the
It really
biggest
is.
difference, because the currency of time is sometimes more valuable than money itself. If actually, I
Yes.
think it is. The currency of
I think
time
so
and
too.
kindness and compassion, these are currencies too. We tend to overlook it. We're so fixated on the monetary side of currency. But the other currencies are so valuable. And the currency of connection and collaboration and community, probably I would put
Yes.
first, right?
I,
So
I would agree.
yeah,
Yes.
well, that's why you're here. That's why we're here. This was not me choosing you. This was us choosing each other, right? So
Yes.
we'll share everything about the mission here, the outreach, which is the Colin James Barth Outreach and CJB Outreach.org. I'm remembering it on the top of
Yes.
my head. And also, this is a very special episode that is a part of Podcastathon, which is a global charity podcast event that is happening right now. And there are many other podcasts that are supporting many other charities. This was just the one I wanted to support. And I was really happy when they came to me and said, "Hey, would you be a part of this?" And I said, "Absolutely, yes." Then you just appeared, so things happen just in the most beautiful, magical, miraculous ways,
They
right?
really do. I
So,
told you I don't believe in accidents ever.
absolutely not. So, where you are now, what I would love to know is where would you like to take this organization? Where would you like to see this charity go?
Oh, well, that's the problem is I'm a Pisces. I don't know if you know anything about Pisces, but
Stuffs left
I'd
and
like to take
right.
the world over.
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, one of the most exciting, well, not the most exciting, in the future, again, I think I've mentioned like I couldn't do anything to stop cancer. I couldn't, but there were certain things that I chose that brought me to where I was at in one of the worst
Mm.
situations I was in. I don't know if you're familiar with Gabby Petito. The
Yes.
one,
I would
so I
imagine the
have reached
entire
out.
world
Yeah,
is with that was
thank God.
whew,
It's about time.
yeah.
Yeah. So I've spoken with them about perhaps bringing a prevention program to young women, and not just about domestic abuse, but about protecting yourself in many ways. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you should have your own savings account. You should be
Mhm.
paying yourself the same way that you would pay yourself at a job. Just taking steps to help young women see the signs. We all see them.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, I don't know. I don't think in being older, you've seen it. It's like, yep, yep, yep. But when you're so young and idealistic and you've got these, you just think you're invincible. So I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
want to bring anybody's dream down, but just to prevention is a very strong point in me too.
Yeah.
So that's kind of another direction that I would like to take the charity.
If you're not familiar with who Gabby Petito is, she was the young lady that traveled a trip with her boyfriend and went missing for a number of months. And then, we come to find out the fate of that was she didn't really go missing. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit since you're talking to them, but just
Yes.
it's important to be aware of your surroundings and the people you're with. Sometimes we aren't aware of that, and we just would like less outcomes to turn out like Abby's situation.
And I saw it the first time I came around, and I will say it profoundly changed me. There was one part of it where the police stopped the couple, and she was outside the van,
Hmm.
and he played it off like I had to lock her out. She couldn't control her emotions. She was aggressive. She was aggressive. She hit me, and the cops ended up turning the situation around, buying him a hotel room for battered husbands or
Hmm.
significant others, leaving her in the van, and she disappeared.
Yeah, and
So,
this was her boyfriend, by the
I
way.
think
This was her
I
boyfriend.
think it was her
Yeah,
fiance.
fiance.
Yeah. So it was a true eye opener to, looking on the outside, being somebody who's been in that situation. I knew all the signs, but we should all learn to know all of the signs. Mothers, I'm sure that her mother, probably had feelings about it, but you just feel helpless, and we can't be in a state of helplessness anymore. It's not okay anymore.
And it's also very hard to tell somebody what to do and
Yeah.
to get out of something if they are not
Ready?
truly ready. Oh, yeah. I mean, you can't tell anyone what to do. You can't tell someone to go to therapy and
No.
say, you really need to go to therapy if they're not ready. And it's understanding the warning signs, understanding any signs, and that was really, I mean, that was definitely on the folks that stopped that car to have a better understanding of that kind of
Yeah.
situation, but also how it trickled down and what it turned into didn't have to happen that way. Absolutely did.
No.
It took a wrong
It was.
turn.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was real tragedy, and it was hard to watch.
yeah, yeah,
Somebody who was in that position and knowing that I could have been, and having four daughters.
yeah,
It's a real problem, and it's not an isolated incident. I
yeah,
mean, we love to think it wouldn't happen to me, but
yeah.
we have to all think that it could,
We also could have
and
thought
that's the only way to get through.
we'd never be in a narcissistic abusive relationship, or that you would be
Yes.
in partnership with someone that is no longer here anymore. I mean, What do they say? If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And that is so true.
Yeah.
We can only go forward powerfully and live our true selves and do the best that we can, of which you're doing now, going through the upsets and the traumas you've gone through. How are your kids doing today? I'd like to know that.
My kids are amazing. They are resilient and strong and sweet and kind. Colin's youngest daughter actually just got a full ride to Clemson University, and
Wow.
yeah, and she did it all herself because she wrote a whole bunch of essays about her father and her stepfather, and she was really a huge part behind this. The outreach as well.
Great.
We both came to terms. The rest of them, I have my first grandbaby. I can't even
How
believe
is
it.
that
Everyone's
even
like,
possible?
they said when they came to me, they said, "Well, what do you want? What is she going to call you?" And I said, "How about Aunt Julie?"
Where you're like, I'm not
So
ready. I'm not ready.
I'm ready, but I
Right.
am ready.
You
Her
are.
first birthday is at my house
Oh
this
my
weekend.
goodness.
I always say they turned out beautifully in spite
Mm,
of me. So I hope I hope the best of them. They've each risen to the occasion, and they have pulled me out
mm.
many times, and they're a reason why I'm here and why I'm relatively sane and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I imagine that there's going to be a spark of courage and vulnerability and strength and just everything that comes with who you are. We'll see that in your kids and your grandchild and those to come, future grandchildren. I got to say, anybody watching this on YouTube, you're going to look at this beautiful woman that I'm having a conversation with and be like, how in the world is she a grandma? Because I'm sitting here going, yeah. I mean, you shine, and maybe part of that is because you're finally being able to live this dream, this passion of putting something that has really been part of your plan for the past 12 years. That's a long time to sit on something, including the books, to finally be able to see things come to light. I can only imagine what it must feel like.
It almost feels like I'm two different people.
Mm,
I had to read my book and then I listened to it, and the audio version just it was like I was listening to somebody else's story. And I don't know. One of the most important things I found, whether you're a writer or not a writer, I didn't write this
mhm,
for notoriety. I didn't write it to put it out into the universe, although I'm glad I did. I forgot so many things and important and real life affirming things
mm,
that I'm so blessed and happy that I wrote down, because when I revisit those things, I remember that there was so much life to be had in a death serial. It just was, there were so many moments that I'm so glad that I made mention to, that my children can relive it, because Piper was only 6 months. So if anyone's going through something like this, I know people are like, journal. Even if it doesn't come naturally, just write down those things that mean something in the moment, because it
mm,
might not strike you in the moment while you're writing it down.
mm.
But I promise you, if you do, you'll go back and you'll say, that I was meant to read that, and
Yep.
it is a reminder of something that I was supposed to learn, and I was too busy at the time. But I'm listening now,
Mm,
and it is really important
love it.
to remember the good things as well as the bad, because you're just swept away by a tidal wave in these kind of crises.
Absolutely. And it says something about who you are and that you're able to do this. And I can imagine you're going to touch, move, and inspire a lot of people who are going to tune into this episode. Again, we're going to share everything and let you know how to get in touch with Julie, how to find out about the Colin James Barth Outreach, your books. It's all going to be in the notes of this podcast, as well as a little bit about Podcastathon, which is this great organization that is giving us as podcasters a space to share amazing philanthropies and charities like Julie's. But before we go,
Yes.
I don't know how familiar you are with Holistically Speaking, but I do a little game at the end of every episode. And this is what I call the brain candy game. Basically, I've been writing down words that you've said. I'm going to throw a word out to you. And what
Mhm.
I would like for you to do is come back with the first word that comes to mind, a little word association. So, a fun way to just kind of like think about what words are really that you're sharing and then what they really mean to you in that moment, right?
Okay.
Keep that
All right.
brain working. I'm going to put my glasses on for
I'm
this one.
trying. I'm trying.
All right, here we go. You ready?
I am ready.
All right. Independent.
Strong.
Trauma.
Lasting.
Loss.
Joy.
Widow.
Missing.
Mom.
Killer.
Narcissist.
Toxic.
Colin.
The best. I know that's 2 words, but I had to do it.
Completely permitted. Caregiving.
Difficult.
Resilience.
Built.
Violence.
Harmful.
Charity.
Community.
Oh, I think we're stopping there. I actually had a couple more, but I think that's really what this is all about, isn't it? It's truly about
It is.
community and, creating that massive and international wave of support, right? And look, as somebody who is in the line of work as a trauma-informed practitioner, I would love to continue this conversation to see how I could help in some way. I'd love to be able to support you further and those that you're serving. So we'll have a deeper conversation about that because as anyone that knows about havening and what I do, it truly is a tool that can help you with your traumas and also the secondary traumatic stress that people go through during very difficult times. But I do
Love
want
it.
to leave you with a moment to share with those who are tuning in. What is it you would like for our holistically speaking community to know? What would you like to leave them with?
I think something I said to you earlier that, everything looks bad when you're in the midst of it, and it takes getting beyond it to really understand why you went through it and to make sense of it. And once you can do that, that's when you make the best of it. Because, as I said, my very worst day today is better than my very best day when I was living a life that I knew was not good for me. And it did take losing it all to get where I'm at. But the things that I lost, I found out they weren't the things I wanted to begin with.
Wow. That sits it, and I think sometimes we don't really realize that, do we? That in that
No.
moment when the very best day from your worst, wow, that's heavy. And I think I'm thinking about some of the things I've been through, and it's so true. We think it's the worst thing ever in the moment, and then we look back on it and we're like, I got through that. I can do this. I can do hard things.
Yeah, and it wasn't as hard on the outside. It was just coming to terms with what you felt you were going to lose. And
Yeah.
if you live in a constant state of trying to hold on to something, it- God will tell you differently.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to lean into things instead of resisting it.
What would the younger Julie need to hear that the Julie today would say to her?
It doesn't matter what people think of you. That was very hard for me. Every step of the way, I worried sometimes more about what other people felt about me than what I felt about me. And I hid a lot of good things about myself for fear that I would be judged. And that was really hard for me releasing the book and doing the charity, and certainly releasing the second book because I don't like to be disliked. But sometimes it's okay to be disliked or thought not so great of, because as long as you're good with you, it doesn't matter what other people think. And if you can look at yourself every morning and know that you're being the best you, it just doesn't matter.
Amen to that. And you don't always have to be understood either.
No, you don't even have to understand yourself sometimes.
That
Just
is
do
the
it.
truth. Sit here and battle ourselves half the time. That's so true.
A lot of the time,
Ay,
I'm
ay,
pretty
ay.
sure. Yeah.
Great. Well, Julie, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. Thank you for everything you're doing. Again, we will share everything about the Colin James Barth Outreach, about your books, about everything you're doing, and just continuing the fight, which isn't so much a fight when you know you have support and community.
Well, and I think it's always easier to fight for someone else, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I'll fight for other people. It feels really good, and I want to. So,
What do you think Colin would say right now? And maybe you've heard him. But what would he say in this moment, knowing everything you're doing, everything you've been through? What would his words be to you? And if it's personal, please don't share.
no, he was always a joker. So I don't know. He'd probably say like, I told you you should have done this a long time ago. I don't
Right?
know.
Like told you
Or
so,
just,
I told you so
yeah.
dance.
Yeah, or I've been there. I've been here the whole time. What have you been waiting for?
Mm,
Probably.
about time you showed up kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you're back.
Right.
Definitely. I'm glad you're back.
That's good. That's a good thing to hear.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Hilary. It was very nice meeting you. And thank you so much for believing in me and our charity. And I hope that we'll do some really great things.
Me too. All right, my friends, if you or someone you know could use CJB Outreach, or even if you want to get in touch with Julie or possibly lend a hand, I've shared everything you need in the notes of this podcast episode, including Julie's books. Great addition to put into your library. And if you're looking for tools to create a safe space in your mind, a haven, join me every month for my free online havening happy hours. These are guided experiences where you learn havening, you put the healing in your hands, and it has neuroscience right there by your side. If you're interested in stepping it up and even learning more in the trainings, I host havening trainings and certifications as well. Just go to hilaryrusso.com/events. You'll find that link also in the notes of this podcast. Holistically Speaking is edited by Two Market Media with music by Lipbone Redding, of course, supported by you. So thank you week after week for saying yes and saying yes to yourself. A special thanks to our friends at Podcasthon for creating this global event as a reminder that help is always possible and you are never alone. And yes, if you just ask, we'll be there. I love you, I believe in you, and I'm sending hugs your way. Be well.
I know the girl